the Christian worldview can make sense of and explain not only objective morality, but a whole host of things, including our moral intuition, because we believe that we are created in the image of God. And so, even though our moral intuitions may not always be accurate, they reflect something real. So our objective is to say, is there evidence, just from our moral intuitions, that suggests that there exists a transcendent lawgiver? Does that qualify as evidence? And this is basically the things that we've talked about. The nature of moral obligations is that they are between persons. An objective moral rule is about a particular action and not someone's opinion of that action. That would be a subjective rule. An objective moral law requires an appropriate authority as the source or grounding of that law. And some objective moral laws transcend human institutions. No, not every law transcends human institutions. You know, the law that requires me to stop at a red light intersection or a stop sign. That's a human institution. But we're talking about moral laws that transcend government or cultures. If such a thing as objective moral law exists, a transcendent personal lawgiver must exist. So that's our argument. Now, not everybody agrees with this. And here is the usual objection from that Debbie brought up and alluded to, that our notions of morality don't require any kind of transcendent lawgiver, even the objective ones. There are objective laws, objective ethics that are grounded someplace different than a transcendent lawgiver. And one of the popular ones is that morals evolved. A sense of moral obligation evolved as cultures evolved.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
Why? Why is morality not just about...
it's transcendent of you and I as Americans. It's transcendent of us as Westerners. It's transcendent as us of living in the 21st century. We evolved certain moral emotions because we're social primate species and we have to get along. So there's an actual evolutionary logic to why committing violence against somebody else is not good. So it begins with something really simple. What's the difference between a rock and an animal? Animals hit back, rocks don't. So right away we have a calculation here of when I should aggress and when I shouldn't aggress, because there will be consequences for it. So much of our moral behavior evolved as a fact that we're a social primate species, and that we have to work together, stick together. We're going to hang together, or surely we will hang separately. This is the nature of a harsh environment. Now it begins with something that sounds sort of calculating, like we call it reciprocity. So I'll do something nice for you, and you'll do something nice for me. Now some people, well, that's just a cold calculation, not real morality. But the shift comes from the fact that it's not enough for me to pretend that I'm a nice guy and lure you into thinking I'm a good person, and then I stab you in the back. Because if I was actually like that, you'd eventually find out, or our fellow group members would find out, I'm not a trustworthy person. So it's not enough to pretend to be a moral person. You actually have to be a moral person. You have to live it, believe it, think it, and become it. Think of it this way. So we have certain emotions that drive behavior. This is what emotions do. So you're hungry. We know exactly the hypothalamus releases certain hormones. You feel hungry, you seek calories. Sure. We have to propagate the species, so you have certain feelings about members of the opposite sex. You find certain things attractive. You don't have to do the calculations of waist to hip ratio and facial symmetry and all the things we find attractive that we've now sort of quantified. You don't have to do the calculations. Sure. Evolution's done the calculations for you. You just have the feeling like, wow, I really think you're hot, right? So
thank you,
those are very...
Sorry.
I'm not on that team. But anyway, not that there's anything wrong with that. But but it's the same logic that my feeling that I'm hungry, or I'm aroused, or I'm feeling altruistic and cooperative, or I'm feeling angry and jealous. Think of jealousy as an emotion. The purpose of the evolutionary logic of jealousy is mate guarding. Because we're not perfectly monogamous, and there's just enough infidelities that go on, you have to be fairly alert to your mate being poached by somebody else. So you become sensitive to little cues and things like this, right? And so that's an emotion that has a logic to it that comes from the bottom up through evolution. And all of the moral emotions are like that.
Now, I would say that what he has just described as the origin of feelings of good and bad, of morality, explains the illusion of morality, not objective morals itself. Do you see how that works? If what he said is true, and that as societies developed and people, certain moral behaviors were induced to be passed on to the next generation because they had a functional benefit for the society. It allowed the people to survive better in groups. Let's just suppose that that is true. I'm not sure that it actually works that way, but let's suppose that it does. Does that then say anything about the moral behavior itself, or does it really describe the feelings that people have and the beliefs that people have about the moral behavior? Which does it address? The latter. He's described how the feelings about certain behaviors evolved and got passed on to others. It does nothing to talk about the actual moral quality of the violent act or the virtuous act itself. It's just so the only thing that evolution can do is explain the illusion of morality, that there is really no such thing in a materialistic, evolutionary, Darwinistic universe. We just get tricked into thinking that so that we can all get along.
Here's the equivocation I think that's going on. I think there's a difference in how we use good. For example, we're sitting here at a chess table. There's a difference between making a move that's good, that helps me win some kind of game that we've made up. So if I go, if I turn my rook somewhere and I should have moved somewhere else, you checkmate me, I don't think the police is going to come and arrest me for making a bad move, right? I didn't do something immoral. I did something that wasn't wise, given the objective that we have set up in the game that we're playing. So in a relationship, you're totally right. If there's not trust, the relationship can't function. It's not a good move like in chess. But that's very different
but within
than
the
a
board,
good,
within the boundary of the board. But if you had another
rule.
piece underneath the board and you snuck it up there when I turned away, that would be morally wrong. That's the difference between playing within the rules and violating the rules. So the rules, the guidelines, is what sets us up.
But these are just rules that we've made up. We could make up a rule that said if you want to pull in a rook and the other person doesn't see and catch you, then it's fine.
Okay, so
why can't we make up rules in the universe if there's not a moral lawgiver?
There is a certain amount of cultural variability. If we were born 500 years ago, you and I would not be saying we intuitively, instinctively, deeply know that slavery is wrong. We would not think that.
No, but you know what we would think? We would think that there still should be justice, there still should be mercy, there still should be morality, and then maybe people would differ about whether blacks qualified as individual persons,
right.
But we would still agree that the moral principle, you shouldn't enslave human beings, was objectively true. This is what Lewis pointed out in Mere Christianity. He said we differ over the facts, but the objective moral truths have not changed.
Whether there's a God or not, we should do the right thing.
Thanks.
Obviously Michael Shermer doesn't understand what Sean McDowell's point is. Did you understand the interchange there when Michael Shermer was using the analogy of sneaking of cheating in chess and sneaking the other queen on the board? He was saying, well, that would violate a certain set of rules. And Sean McDowell said, well, on your view, we just make up the rules anyway, so we could make up a rule that says you can do that. Yeah. So what Michael Shermer, the atheist, is doing is he wants to live in a universe where there's an objective system of scoring, so that he could say that rape is wrong, or that global warming is a danger and that it's wrong to not own an electric car or something like that. He wants to live in a universe like that where he can make moral pronouncements. Some of the new atheists, I've forgotten the guy's name right now, complained a lot about the God of the Bible as being, sadistic and misogynist and violent and all these bad things, which he claimed were really wrong and bad about the God of the Old Testament. And then on the other hand, said, but there is no such thing as moral truth because it's a materialistic universe and those kind of things don't exist. So it's the having the cake and eating it that you see having quite often. So this brings us to the wrap-up. I've shown you that there's a distinction between objective and subjective assessments of a moral issue, that a moral issue requires, an objective moral law requires some kind of transcendent authority to ground it and make sense of it. We don't know yet if such a thing really exists. I mean, if that is true, it sort of makes sense that you would require that, but maybe objective moral law doesn't exist. Maybe maybe Michael Shermer is right and we just think that certain things are right or wrong because they help us get along better. But if all that exists is matter and energy and the laws of physics, there's no room for this kind of immaterial personal obligation, which is what morality is. So that's our question now. Do real objective moral rules actually exist? I think that it is intuitively held that they do. If you really scratch below the surface on anybody, there is something that they think is a real, actual moral law somewhere. It may not be what you think it is, but nobody can live very long without holding that there is at least something that is objectively morally good or bad. But the Michael Shermers of the world will argue otherwise. So, is there a way to deal with that? And here's how you deal with it. You find some clear case example and just say, for example, is it wrong to torture babies for the fun of it? Now, if you just say, is it wrong to torture babies? Now, someone might think of some bizarre example. Well, if you were in this dire circumstance and the existence of the planet depended on you being forced to torture this baby, then that could justify, forget that. You can always think of some kind of bizarre, strange situation. But how about this? Is it wrong to torture a baby for the fun of it? Just because I like it. Is that wrong? I think most people deep down would agree that that is objectively wrong, that is evil. And it reflects a lot of the evil that people complain about and are worried about and try to work against today. That's a clear case example that could be offered, I think, to say, yeah, I think there's maybe at least one objective moral rule that doesn't depend on somebody's opinion, and it doesn't depend on the greatest pleasure for the greatest number, and it doesn't depend on, what if everybody does this, and it doesn't depend on attributing things to evolution. Or, you find out what somebody really cares about. Maybe they really care about saving the planet. Maybe they really care about protecting girls from sex trafficking. Maybe they really care about, the tactics of a political party or other. Just find one of those things and relativize it. Say, okay, I think I'm going to get some buddies and we're going to go out and kill some baby seals today. We think that's going to be fun. And who's to say that there's nothing wrong with it? Well, that gets to what I think George mentioned earlier, and that is that you look at the animal kingdom, they do what they do. They eat each other. They take advantage. The strong dominate the weak in the animal kingdom. Why is it that human beings often want to turn that around and have the strong protect the weak instead of dominate the weak? As you're saying, I think that's a good clue that there's something different about human beings. And Christianity makes sense of that by saying it's part of the image of God that's built into us, into our soulish moral nature. We are moral creatures, unique from animals. His question was, how strong do you find the moral argument for God as compared with some of the other arguments? I think it's strong, but it's a little more difficult to understand because most people haven't thought clearly about the distinctions between a subjective and an objective moral rule and fall into the misunderstanding that Michael Shermer was demonstrating about how you can explain moral feelings and then assuming that the moral feelings indicate moral realism, the real, actual, objective moral truth. So it takes a little bit more work to I think get your mind around this subject. But I think it's powerful because everybody is immediately in touch with it. Our intuitions resonate with this kind of discussion once we understand what the issues are. And I think it's universal.